Great. Thanks ever so much, Ellie. Thanks for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. And those that are joining us once this has been obviously videoed, I hope this is of use. If you've got any questions, just jump in with those questions as I'm going through things. It's not a problem at all. I'm aware that some of you have got coaching backgrounds as well. So if you can augment and further improve some of the ideas that I suggest, that would be fantastic as well. So thank you in advance for that. Some of the brief that I've got from HSP was just to talk about things like limited resources, poor weather or adverse weather conditions, smaller indoor spaces that you might be able to do physical activity in, and engaging various ages in one space. So looking at different activities that might not be traditional football, rugby, hockey, tennis, sort of sports orientated, but maybe more games activities that might get more people participating. So in terms of the setup, I tend to use the format of relay races as a way of introducing people to the activities that we're doing, especially with the way that Happy works, because a drop off, yes, you might be starting at 10, but in my experience of running those courses, we've had people arriving at 20 past, half past. And actually the first 20 minutes, half an hour has been quite a useful opportunity to get them into teams, get them knowing each other, making them feel safe in their environment and comfortable in their environment. So I think in terms of relay race games, they seem to work quite well. I tend to only have 4 people in a team if I can help it in terms of the numbers. So if you've got quite a few children participating, I don't like to see massive queues of 10 people, 12 children in a row. I'd rather see them in sort of groups of 4s, maybe 5s tops, depending on your space and activity. And in terms of the relay races, if you've got some equipment, and we talked about limited resources, things like running out to a cone, but when they run out to the cone, they may when they move to a cone, sorry, they may do a different type of movements. They might hop, they might skip, they might jump, they might do a range of cariokas, whatever the sort of movements they can do to make the game new and engaging every time, I think is a way forward. I've seen my colleagues with the cone that they're running out to have a ball on top of the cone, and they've got to touch that ball with a body part. So it might be their head, it might be their bottom, it might be their left knee, it might be their right arm, whatever you think's appropriate. So they run out. Now, if they knock the ball off the cone, they obviously have to put the ball back on. It slows them down. It's a bit of a race, and obviously the next person goes out, and it's a bit of a relay race. I tend to use the relay races, as I say, as a way of getting them introduced to each other, but also a way of setting the behaviour. And I'll talk quite a lot about behaviour throughout the presentation this afternoon. So for me, I'm a bit like, I've stolen it from Harry Potter, Dumbledore, in that at the end of the Triwizard Cup, he gives points and he takes points away in terms of the competition. And I tend to give points for the team that maybe are sitting straightest, the team that are win the relay race maybe, but then sit down in silence so that I know that they're finished. It may be, it's not school, but it's just a bit of fun. It's just a bit of things. It may be that I give bonus points to the team that were coming in last, but actually they still managed to do all the activity correctly and they did it properly. So I give them 3 bonus points because they did really well in terms of they didn't give up and they had that perseverance and that resilience to make sure they finished the activity. So it might sound a bit daft, but actually it just means that they participate, they're engaged, and they hopefully start doing a bit of maths with it as well in terms of that cross curriculum. I know it's not a fit, fed and read delivery, but I think wherever we can get the children thinking about their maths or cross-curriculum activities through our delivery of sport and physical activity, I think that's a way forward. So lots of games would be a relay games would be a sensible thing. Some of you have done under and over, where they have a ball and they put it over and then put it under through their legs. Comes back to one of the scenarios that we'll talk about in terms of having different age groups taking part. Under and over is a great one because you've got someone that's maybe 10, 11, 12 years of age passing the ball over the top of their head, and then you've got a little 4 or 5-year-old behind them trying to reach up and get it. Now, it's a bit of fun and there's no contact, obviously, in terms of it. It's not an invasion game. but it just gets them moving that ball to each other. They have to communicate, they have to talk, and it's once again a bit of a race. What happens is they go over with the ball, then the next person goes under, over, under, over, under. The person at the back then runs forward with the ball and comes to the front of the line, and then they continue to do that. So what you tend to do is have a cone that they're based from, so that all the guys are in the same line, and then have a cone out in front, maybe 10, 15 foot, whatever it might be, in front of you, so they work towards. And when that first person gets to the cone, or where the last person manages to get past that cone, that ends the race. So it can be varied depending on how you want to do it. Once you've done under and over, guess what? You do side to side. So instead of going under and over, you go side to side, and they start looking at different movements there. I do a lot of corporate activity, and even the 30, 40, 50 somethings love playing these games, let alone the Diddy ones. So the competitive streak comes in, especially if they think points mean prizes and that kind of stuff, tends to work quite nicely. So I would suggest things like under and over, side to side, even rolling the ball between their legs. So it has to roll all the way back to the last person. So they all open their legs up, sort of a star jump setup. Roll the ball between the legs, last person at the back picks the ball up, runs round to the front, and then does the same thing and rolls the ball through their legs for everyone else. You can obviously pat it through, you can make it go faster, but once again, it's in a sort of a game format, a game competition. The other ones, in terms of I've seen people do, is when you've done under and over, instead of running straight back round to the front of the line, you can actually get them going in and out of the people in the line. Now, it takes a little bit of coordination, bit of health and safety in terms of your setup. Obviously, they can't be running into each other, so think about the spaces between the people. And I would always demonstrate the activity. So I would have maybe 6 lines of 4 or 5 children set up, but I would make sure that I demonstrate the weaving in and out to come to the front. And I would say for any of your activities, I would demonstrate with one group first. So make sure everyone's watching and everyone's ready, but have the ability to demonstrate to one group as to what they want to do and what you want them to do in terms of the rules. They talk about visual, kinesthetic, and auditory learners when we talk about sports delivery. I'm very much a visual kinesthetic. I like to see, I like to do. You can tell me moving my arms and that sort of stuff in terms of running around to the front. I'm trying to demonstrate to you without physically doing it myself. So I'm a very visual kinesthetic. And a lot of sports people are visual kinesthetics. They like to see and they like to do. So if you can show them how to do the activity, they then take that on board, and what do they say? A picture paints 1,000 words. And I think just by doing that demonstration, that gives that young person the opportunity to see it. Especially when we've got children in the happy program. Sorry, I think 25% of them came back from an SEND background. I'm looking at Shelley, who's nodding, and all is looking at me in terms of the research. So they may not get things straight away if you talk at them for too long. They need to see a visual demonstration. They need to see what they need to be doing to learn how to participate in that activity. We're talking about an under and over game. Well, actually, they might find that quite confusing, some of them, in terms of processing that information if you talk to them about it. So I would definitely recommend visual demonstrations to all your participants so that they at least have an understanding of what the game looks like, if you, rather than just explain it to them. So sorry, Shelley, please too. Yeah.
Just with that, when we looked at the report, we had children representing 33 different primary languages as well. So especially if you're delivering perhaps around Watford, Hemel, those kind of areas where we know we've got a more diverse population, English may well still be their spoken language, but the nuances and understanding may well be in other languages. So again, that demonstration thing is important again.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's a great shout. Sorry, I hadn't appreciated that. I've just written that down. 33 different languages. Wow. Yeah, visual demonstrations definitely a way forward. So under and over, side to side, rolling the ball back, in and out of each other. You can do 15, 20 minutes of delivery like that, and they'll absolutely bite your hand off for it. They'll love it. Definitely think about points mean prizes. I take in a whiteboard if you get a chance, just a mini whiteboard, and I encourage them to come up with team names. So they have team names that they come up with. One of the things I ask them to do is to make sure they know all of the other children in their team. Can they remember all of the children's name in their team? They get bonus points for that if they can do that. They get bonus points if they got a really great team name. And when I've facilitated that, I've gone around asking them different things. Who's your favourite sort of sports person? Or it might be, I know, Adam Peaty, obviously swimmer. We're the PT Pistons or whatever it might be. Yeah, they obviously make up their ideas and they come up with some crazy names. Obviously, there's that guided discovery of giving them a little bit of movement, but then being that command style of what's appropriate. So sometimes you may get them being very creative, but maybe not necessarily in the way that you'd like them to be so creative. So it's just having that handle, once again, on behavior of, if you can give me a fantastic team name, I'm going to give you 5 bonus points. I think that really helps them in terms of settling down, learning each other's names in their team. If there's 33 different languages, obviously that can be quite challenging. So some organizations I know have stickers with their names on there. I saw a delivery by Claire McCauley from the Crom School Sports Network the other day, and a lot of the kids had their names on a tag. Now, that might be challenging for some, it might not be for others. It's up to you guys how you want to do it, but it's just some of the things that I've seen from other coaches and what they've done. So relay race games, as I said to you, they can be hopping, skipping, jumping. They can put their head on an object. You can get them balanced in a beanbag. You might have some hula hoops maybe that you could use to step in and out of the hula hoops. But it depends obviously on what equipment you've got. If you're in a small area, I tend not to use balls throwing them around because that tends to be a little bit more challenging. I tend to use more bean bags if you can do, but that's not to say you've got to run out and get bean bags. There are other ways and means of obviously creating activities and games. But I think those tend to be quite nice opportunities to play some fun activities without having to do a great deal in terms of the layout of the room and of setup. The other thing I've seen people do, especially in school halls, which tend to be quite smaller in size than maybe the University of Hertfordshire sports facility, is look at where your relay races start from. So historically, I've seen coaches have one end of the room running maybe to the other end of the room for their relay race. But if you've got 25, 30 children in that sort of space, actually, could you do relay races where they're coming into the middle, but obviously having a big walkway distance, maybe half a metre in between them coming together? So utilising the space a little better, that they run over a shorter distance for their relay, but actually you've got one team participating from, or 2 or 3 teams participating from one side of the room and 2 or 3 teams participating from the other side of the room, and don't line them up, sort of line them slightly separately from each other so they're not bumping into each other. And also I would say make sure there's a clear definition of an area where you can walk between, but also keep the teams separate from when they're running in. I asked Shelley and all about risk assessments and making sure that the activities you're doing are safe. I know there's going to be another workshop about that, which is fantastic. But just for the coaches, when they write their session plans, think about the activities they're doing, who's taking part, what equipment you're going to be using, what area and what space you're using, I think is really important to do. So just have a think about that to try and keep the activity as safe as possible would be my advice. Other games that we might want to play that are quite good fun. There's a game called Rats and Rabbits. I don't know whether you've seen this, guys, but Rats and Rabbits, we're using those words on purpose because they're obviously quite similar. The setup is where the coach stands at the front and they've got 2 lines. They've got the rats and the rabbits, and they are fairly equal in terms of heights and abilities against each other. And you would put maybe a 6-year-old against another 6-year-old. You wouldn't put a 12-year-old against another 6-year-old because it's ultimately a tagging game. So the idea is that your rats and rabbits probably about 2 meters apart from each other in terms of space. Your rats, I would suggest break it down, talk to them about what they're going to do. So your rats, when you shout rats, they're going to move away from the center of the area, and they're going to run past probably some cones or an area that you've laid out to their safe zone. So they're running from to one side only when they're the rats. So they're moving that side, and they're getting, if we say rats, they've got to get to their safe zone before being tagged by the rabbits. Similarly, if we've got rabbits, they're running to one side, and before they get to their safe zone, if they get tagged, then they would lose a life if they don't get to their safe zone. So you encourage them to go one way or the other. Now, that's fine. And in terms of breaking it down as specific as that, because you want them to understand which way they're running. So if they're rats, they're running that way. If they're rabbits, they're running the other way. The reason being is you then start being a bit daft once you know where they are and that they understand the game, is that you might say rats, but actually you move to the other direction, and you find out who your visual learners are, because they all follow you, even though they know rats is that way. Similarly, you could do that with rabbits. You can get them to turn and face the other way and then shout rats. And of course, they're all disorientated in terms of which way they're going again. So it comes with a bit of a sort of check and be aware that, come back to the languages, the SEND background, knowing your participants is really important, but it is possible to play this game if you're very specific and break things down in chunks. So rats, yeah, you know you're going that way. Right, which way do we go, rats? Oh, we run this way. Which way do you go, rabbits? We go this way. Okay, fine. And you can break it down as much as that so that they get the concept of the game. Don't need much equipment with it, probably 4 to 6 cones, if that, to mark out the area. But obviously when they're running outwards, if you're in a small area, think about where they're running towards. My advice is be at least a meter and a half away from a wall as a minimum, so they're not running into the wall. Because what the kids do is they use the wall to break their speed rather than slow down before they get to the wall. They're putting their arms out, break their wrists, not good fun and not great for you. So my advice is just think about, if you're playing something like a tagging game or rats and rabbits or something along those lines, make sure that you're at least a meter and a half away from a wall or maybe an object that they could potentially run into and hurt themselves. I'm probably preaching converted, and it's probably very obvious, guys, but honestly, I've seen a number of kids running into walls to stop themselves because they don't necessarily have the experience and the knowledge that the guys on the call have. So think about that in terms of safety. Other games, you've got things like Stuck in the Mud. Great game. I tend to have a situation where I'm a little bit concerned about Stuck in the Mud. So you tag someone and you freeze. And when you've got the people that are trying to help each other untag, they run underneath the arms. We used to run between the legs when we were kids in the playground, and obviously scratch all our knees up and our trousers up. But I would say go underneath the arms. Now, the only downside of underneath the arms is one's coming that way, one's coming the other way, and they bang into each other. So just think about maybe setting some rules where the children tell you that they can only untag by facing the person, or I've seen people play it as a toilet flush game. So they flush the toilet, or they have to wash their hands. So whoever's been tagged is washing their hands, and they come over and they spray them and they wash their hands and go. Now, obviously that's very COVID related, but we got the kids doing that and talking about the fact that they're washing their hands, making sure they wash their hands properly in terms of the COVID, and then we spray them to them being able to be released and be free again. I say a bit daft, but it's a way of reacting to maybe to the COVID side of things. So it's Stuck in the Mud, great game, really good. But you could adapt it and change it, obviously, depending what you feel is appropriate. And also, if you've got a smaller space, it might not be so easy to play. So think about that in terms of logistics. If you can't do Stuck in the Mud, you might be able to play a game called Foxes and Farmers. So a number of people have what I would call tails. So they have bibs, and they put a bib into their side. I tend to put it in the side rather than the back side of the shorts, because obviously if the game is about taking the tail away, ideally they're grabbing the tail and not grabbing the shorts as well. So that's why we tend to go to the side, just a bit of decency and a bit of child protection and that kind of side of things. So I tend to put the tags to the side, just like in rugby, you'd have maybe tag belts. I tend to use a bib. The idea is we've got maybe 4 foxes, 4 farmers and maybe about 10 foxes. The farmers don't have a tail, and they're moving around the area trying to grab the fox's tail. If they manage to do it, they become a fox, and the other person becomes a farmer. That farmer cannot get the person that's just got them straight away. They have to go and find somewhere else. Now, the downside of that game is that you might have more children, so some children that are more physically aware and capable than others. And so actually the children that maybe not so physically developed yet might feel that they're always getting their tail tagged and taken away, and also that they can't get anyone else. So it's then getting that balance of which teams you put together, how you put those dynamics together, and also maybe giving those children that are not as physically capable with other children that might be more developed. So just think about the balance on that. They talk about the step principles. So some of you might have come across this before. Youth Sport Trust promoted this about, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years ago. So it's space, task, equipment, and people. So space, task, equipment, people. They also talk about time as a T. So space, task, equipment, people. So what we're looking at is changing the dynamics of the space, maybe changing the task that they might get involved in, the equipment that's being used, and in terms of people, the number of people taking part. So if you're doing, I don't know, a tagging game, you might only have 3 people tagging rather than 4 or 5. So you've got less people trying to take the tails, which makes it easier for maybe the children that aren't so developed in terms of their physicality. So think about how many people you've got taking part, and also how many people are doing the tagging. So obviously if there's 5 taggers, it's much easier for the taggers to get the tails. If there's only 3 taggers, it's much harder for the people to get the tails. Also, if you've got 5 people on the team, people don't become self-conscious and go, oh, actually, everyone's looking at me. I'm the only one that's trying to get the tail. And other people are sort of smiling and laughing at me that I can't do this. So it's just about knowing your group, knowing your participants, and thinking about how you can utilize the step principles to get everyone performing at the level that they need to. So sometimes you find that if you make it too easy for children, they get a bit bored, like, oh, it's boring, I don't want to play this, it's a bit rubbish. Whereas if you make it too hard, they go, can't do this, I'm giving up, I'm not taking part. So it's getting that balance, using those step principles to be able to differentiate your activity on the different age groups that you've got taking part. And I'll come on to that in a minute.
Stu, I'm so glad you've just mentioned all of that, because we did a lot of camp audits and we went out and visited, and you can absolutely see, not only because of the ages, but also going back to the fundamentals of this whole fund, the kids that are coming to these projects are at a slightly different place in life to their peers. And so, you know, there is a lack of confidence, there is a lack of resilience, there is a constant feeling that when they're at home, they're not getting the same support and nurture. And so all of those skills that may have developed in a safer, more comforting environment aren't necessarily there. And it is so clear to see the kids that just want to back away as soon as they feel like they are threatened or it's too difficult. Or I love the fact that you've just covered that, because we saw that. You see Good. That behaviour on the camps. Yeah,
you do. You very, very much so. So I think the more we can do to engage them and make them feel comfortable in their environment, we might want to take them out of their comfort zone a little bit, but not too much, because it's not a training sports camp. It's a fun activity, enjoyable, and those softer skills, I think, as you highlighted, are really important. And I think we can draw that out with that differentiation of the step principles. In terms of the different ages, obviously engaging a wide range of ages is challenging and difficult. And I think it comes back to your delivery in terms of their awareness of putting certain age groups together, maybe, in terms of their abilities, and also the physicality. So if you're going to play something like Stuck in the Mud, it's thinking about the age groups that are going to be participating and taking place. Can you introduce sort of different rules that might apply to certain people in the group? So maybe there's you mark out a box in your Stuck in the Mud area. You mark out a box that anyone can go in, and they can't be tagged for 3 or 4 seconds if they're in that area. So it means that they can get somewhere, have a breather, maybe have a think about what they're doing, and then going off into a safe space. It may be that only 8-year-olds and below allowed to go into that's a safe box. You can make up all the different types of rules, but hopefully I'm giving you sort of examples of different ways of engaging with the different age groups that you've got participating in your sessions. So thinking about the different age groups, but also in the different space they might use. So when I first started doing coaching, they talked about open activities so that everyone can take part irrespective of any physicality need. So it might be that it's a moving around in the area. And I said moving rather than walking, because you might have some participants that might be using a wheelchair, for example. So they're moving around in the area. So they're moving in and out of each other, not bumping into each other, rather than saying, right, we're walking or we're running. Because as soon as somebody can't walk or somebody can't run, then it's not an open activity. So an open activity is making sure that everyone can do the task that you're asking them to do, i.e. moving around in that area. Now, as soon as you start to change things with the step principles, you might introduce a ball, maybe. So introduce a bit of equipment. You might introduce a task, maybe, that's slightly more challenging. So maybe it's gone from a walk to maybe a run or a jog or a skip. As soon as somebody can't do that, it's not an open activity. So you've moderated your activity, you've differentiated, and that's fine, and we can do that, but it's then having that opportunity for people to be able to take part at the level they need to. I saw a coach do this brilliantly once, where they had like a netball court. So an outside netball court, and they had everyone moving around in that first third of the netball court. Now, the coach, I thought, was brilliant. He turned around to them and said, look, you all seem happy doing that. Is that all right? You're all okay with sort of moving around? Yeah, we're happy with that. And then some of them said, well, actually, we'd like to progress this on a little bit. We'd like to hop or skip or jump or whatever it might be, or introduce a ball. And the coach said, look, if you don't feel comfortable doing that yet, you don't have to do that. You can just move around still. Keep moving around in that initial third. Those that wanted to go to develop it and maybe go to the next level of hopping and skipping in that middle third, they could go into that if they wanted to, and they could still come back down to that first third if they wanted to, if they then got out of their comfort zone. Those children, after a while, that feel actually in the middle bit was too easy. We want a ball putting in while we're jogging and skipping and running. We want to be at that level. They then were in that final third, and they could go in when they wanted to. So you had clear differentiation of ability in terms of giving them the opportunity to make things harder for themselves, and they start coming up with the step principles. You ask them, okay, so how do I make this harder? Oh, well, I change the space, I make it bigger, I make it smaller, I change the task, I change the equipment you're using. And that's something that I think I've seen from other coaches do a brilliant job, especially on the happy side of things, is knowing where we can differentiate for our participants. And I think if we can do that, that's a definite way forward. In terms of the different activities you can do. Sorry, what we've talked about sort of smaller indoor spaces at the moment, and then I've just given you that example of that netball course. Hopefully I'm giving you different ways of interacting in your space. So outside, you could easily do that, sort of moving around that first third, go into the second third, and then the final third. And actually you might then, the children in the final third that have done really well, you might use as peer mentors in their first area again to try and get the guys who are maybe in the first area more confident to go into the next level. Let the children set the rules. They'll come up with activities. They'll come up with ways of changing those step principles. What's really interesting as well is I've then looked at parallel games. So if you've done any inclusive delivery, parallel games are a great way of doing it. So say all the children are still playing volleyball, using that idea of the thirds on the netball courts, and maybe they're going a different way. So rather than going from end to end, they're going from side to side on the netball courts. You've got one group of children that are playing volleyball, but actually they're doing it with a balloon, so with no net. So maybe they're pushing the balloon to the other side, and if it hits the ground, obviously that's the other team winning the point. Be careful with the SEND environment, that especially where they don't like touching balloons. So think about the texture of the balloon, the noise of the balloon if it bursts, the noise of the balloon if it's losing air. I've got Shelley nodding at me. Just be aware that if you're going to use balloons, just be aware of that in your delivery. It's not say you can't do it. You could use a softer ball, maybe one of those foam balls might be a better way of doing it. But I'm just trying to give you some ideas. But that first netball third might be that they're hitting a softer ball across. The joys of the balloon is that it's not moving as quickly, so it gives us that opportunity of differentiation. in terms of the way that it's set up, I think that helps in terms of the differentiation and that third netball court. But if you got the parallel games, you've got the second area, which is where you still play volleyball, but actually it might be a softer ball. You might use a lowered net. You might play adapted rules. So once again, we've used the step principles to change a little bit. The two courts are still playing volleyball, but you've adapted the rules so that everyone's able to play at their level. And then the third court maybe is more your traditional volleyball, where it's a higher net. You put certain rules in. They can only touch it. The ball's only allowed to bounce once their side, whereas in the middle area they can bounce two times. So it's just giving you some different ideas about how to adapt your game so they can still participate in that parallel activity, and it's still volleyball, but obviously we've changed it up by having those step principles and utilize those step principles. So hopefully that helps in terms of giving some ideas about how to play more traditional sports that are more national governing body related, rather than the games I gave you in terms of the warm-up relay races at the beginning and the things like stuck in the mud and rats and rabbits maybe. Thinking about rats and rabbits and those games, have you ever played, do you remember the game Buckaroo, anyone? So where you had the donkey and you put things on the donkey's tail and it flipped up? I've got a few smiles. Now, we've played it slightly different, or I got taught the game by other people, where you have a team of 4 or 5 people, but they have got maybe 20 things that they run out and put out on their buckaroo, and do it in a relay race. So they just hang things on them and put stuff on, and they have to carry them and that sort of stuff, and they have to get back to the beginning. And the team that get back to the beginning without dropping anything can shout buckaroo and they win. So it's a fun relay race where you've got a bit of equipment you can put on the shoulder. You can put a cap on their head, maybe a cone on their head. You can do all lots of fun stuff, but it just gets them engaged. It's a bit of fun, and it's just another game that you might be able to play in a small area as well. So you're just hanging things on, but if you've got 20 items, you might only be running over 10 foot, but you can keep running backwards and running backwards and forwards, and make it quite a high intensity type activity, which I think is quite good fun. And hopefully that helps us as well in terms of just some different activities. Layout of the room, I think, is really important. I talked about the safety of it in terms of being away from the walls. I stole this from another coach once. They had red cones as their area that they could have their kit and equipment in. And they used red cones in particular because the children were just launching in and going and helping themselves. But what they did was they said, no, over a period of time, we used the red cones because it stopped them going in. So red, like the traffic lights are stopped. They can't just go in and help themselves to kit and equipment. They changed that a little bit. So I thought that was an interesting one, where they just put the red cones around our stuff so that people didn't just pile in and help themselves. So that worked quite well in terms of layout. It just meant it helped with discipline. So they didn't just help themselves the kit and off they go and play football. They took it nice and easy. They had things like those children that I don't think you'll be giving them water bottles, but I've seen people use a fridge as well, where they've laid out some white cones in terms of water bottles. But I'm assuming you won't be using those water bottles at the happy camps, do they? I mean, because of the COVID, no, we don't. Okay, fine, that's good. It's just some of the holiday camps we run, they have their own water bottles, and we obviously try and make sure they're spread out and following all the rules and guidance. So think about your layout. Think about who's got access to what. Think about where your kit's stored. Also stole some great ideas from coaches the other day. So we've done, I did a rectangle area, and we went outside. So it's a slightly bigger area than maybe you have in a school hall. And what I did was I stole an idea from another coach, where I had lots of cones underneath the cones that I'd laid out. So what we call a 10 by 10 grid. So I walked 10 spaces, put a cone down, walked another 10 spaces in a sort of a square area, and then put another 10, and put 4 cones down. So I had a 10 by 10 by 10 grid. And what I did was I then did a 20 by 20 and a 30 by 30. So I had a 30 by 30 grid because I had the number of children to do it. And I put a lot of cones underneath. And as soon as I did that, when we went to maybe a smaller practice where we needed only a 10 by 10 area, I could just pop down a cone, and I created that space already for things like pig in the middle and things, those sort of games. And actually that worked really well because I wasn't having to go back over to my kit equipment area and pick up the cones and then come back again. I just laid it underneath. And when I needed to adapt my space, I just put a cone down, or I got the guys to put a cone down, and that worked really well. So when you plan your sessions, my advice to your coaches is think about, yes, you're marking out an area, but can you be clever and put maybe other color cones underneath the cones that you've done to mark out maybe a blue area, and then I use the yellow cones underneath that I could then mark out a smaller area inside it to do some specific work, maybe some technical work or some fun games of throwing and catching, sending, receiving, maybe with one hand, maybe with two hands catching, maybe with a non-dominant hand. So once again, come to the step principles, changing the task and activity, getting the kids to come up with games. They were doing things like pig in the middle, hot potato, loads of different things where I sort of just gave them a tennis ball and said, right, here's an area, here's a coned area. You can send and receive beanbags or tennis balls or whatever it might be to make it easy. And that seemed to work quite well. And they seem to enjoy that. So once again, step principles: space, task, equipment, people. Bad weather I've got as a thing. Yeah, obviously we've got plans to be outside, like I just mentioned. And if that gets taken away from you, obviously you've got to do the risk assessment. If it's too wet, obviously you can't be outside. If it's inside, you're then adapting your sessions. So if you were looking at doing a pulse raiser to get them going, get them moving, once again, I would say relay race is a great way of doing it. Small numbers of teams, small number in your team. So maybe 4, 5 maximum. So they get that heart rate started to build up in terms of pulse raiser. Children seem to love themes. So pirates seems to be a great theme that the kids seem to love. The other day when I was on a happy course, being a pirate and obviously the daft thing because they are and all that kind of stuff, just playing up to it a little bit seemed to work. The kids loved the theme, especially an activity I stole from another coach where it was a passing game. So you had 2 teams, had one team that were passing the ball into 3 balls, so 3 footballs. So they had to knock the ball off these 3 cones. If they managed to knock a cone off, they could run forward and then pick up a cone or pick up a bib or pick up another football. And the cone was worth 1 point, the bibs were worth 5 points, and the footballs were worth 10 points. So they passed the ball at these 3 balls that were on cones, or they could be rolled, or you can change the task. It didn't have to be sort of football related, but I stole it from a football coach. When they knocked the ball off, and they knocked 2 balls off, so they could go forward and they could pick up 2 cones or 2 bibs or 2 footballs, and they brought that back to their pirate treasure chest so they could bring it back. They had somebody on as a backstop behind the 3 balls that were being knocked off, so they could field them, or you could have 2 people doing that. So once again, you can change your step principles by having more people as your backstops, as it were. But the game finished after lots of different activities of trying to knock the ball off their targets, running out, picking up the bibs or the cones or the balls and coming back. And then they had to count all of their treasure. So they had to work as a team and count the treasure of the number of footballs they had being 10 points, the number of bibs they collected being 5 points, and the number of cones they collected being 1 point. And they put a special item out there, which was the plastic thing that holds the cone stack together. They put that out there and hit it and said that was worth 50 points. But didn't tell them what it was worth, but also said there's also something out there that's worth minus 10 points. I can't remember what they put out. I think it was a yellow football rather than a white football maybe. But it was just, once again, cross curriculum again. The kids absolutely loved it. They just played and played and played. And when they've counted up all their stash in their pirate treasure chest, they all turned around and went, "Can we play again?" And the coach went, "Yeah, of course you can, but you've got to go and take it all out and you've got to put it all back out there again," rather than the coach then having to do it all and getting to do it. And they absolutely loved it. They were like, "Yeah, fine." And off they went and collected all of that equipment and laid it all out again so they could play again. But before they played again, though, I thought this is what the coach did brilliantly. They then turned around and said, "Okay, so have a think with pirates. What sort of things could we do to change the game a little bit? Because at the moment, we're knocking a ball off or aiming a ball at three footballs to knock them off. And if we get all 3, we can get 3 things. If we knock 2 off, we can get 2 things. If we knock 1 off, we can get 1 thing. What can we do differently?" And the kids started talking about each other. And they went, oh, we've got a great idea. And we're like, all right, okay, what's that then? Fire the cannons. So what was happening was we were watching the lines, and there was a kid that maybe wasn't as good at kicking a football, and they just hide to the back and hide to the back and hide to the back. Oh, you go, you're better than me. You go, the better than me. So actually we went fire the cannons, and we could see who was performing, because it was such a hectic race before. We actually said, okay, we'll shout, the coaches will shout fire the cannons, or the participants shout fire the cannons. And then we saw who was kicking the ball, so that this kid wasn't just moving back and back and back and not actually taking their turn, which I thought was really helpful. And fire the cannons, obviously pirate related type stuff. They then did a thing where while they're running and playing and doing the activity, they said, oh, we should do captains on deck. So when they shouted captain on deck, everyone had to salute the captain, which was the coach, and they all had to salute the captain. And then when she saluted them back, they could all then get going again, but only after she'd saluted them back, which I mean, it sounds daft, but it just worked in terms of the pirate theme. So it was more sort of storytelling. They did things like scrubbing the decks. So the kids, someone shouted out, scrub the decks. They all had to get down and start scrubbing the decks and pretend they were doing that, climb their rigging. So they were all climbing their rigging. Captain's on board, so they're all saluting. And it just added to it a little bit in terms of, well, I'm trying to run and do a relay race. Yeah, but captain's on deck, so you all got to stop. So it was just a bit of fun. Once again, very storytelling, but the kids absolutely loved that pirate theme. I had no idea that would work so well. And as a practitioner, as a deliverer, it was one of the easiest things to set up once you'd shown them how to play the game. So we did the visual demonstration of passing the ball, knocking the balls off, that kind of stuff, and how many cones they could pick up, so they understood it. When the coach tried to talk it through, they didn't get the game at all. But actually, after the visual demonstration, the participants got the game and then realised what was going on. And as I say, as a deliverer, it's one of the easiest games you can do, because there's lots of fun and activity in it. There's lots going on. The kids love doing it in terms of their numbers. There was sort of 3 or 4 of them in each team, so they had high repetition of goes. And once they'd finished and added everything up, they then wanted to lay it all out and put it all out again. So actually, for 20 minutes, half an hour, the coach and myself weren't actually doing any coaching, as it were. We were more facilitating the activity and encouraging them and said, oh, well done. Oh, you don't want what? You're going to get the ball. That's only worth, that's worth 10 points. Yeah, definitely go and get that. Don't just get the bib. Go and grab it. But obviously we were making sure they weren't cheating, not being naughty in terms of taking things that they shouldn't do. So that came back to the rules that we probably did at the beginning of the day in terms of what's acceptable behavior, which I'm sure you'll go through in other presentations. So that for me, that sort of pirate game, the pirate ship, I thought was a lovely activity and worked really, really well. Another game which is similar to that is finders, keepers, losers, weepers. So once again, you've got teams of 3s or 4s or 5s. They're rolling of the ball out, or they can putt a ball out if you've got golf equipment. I saw this done as a golf activity, try golf, where they putt the ball out, and whichever cones, so you have 40, 50 cones laid out across the area. Whichever cones they hit, they could go and pick up. If you're doing the putting thing, for me, we had to make sure that they put the club down before they ran out. So think about the safety side of things, is a really important thing. Once again, you could do cones, could be different colours, could be different points, minus and plus, that cross-curriculum stuff again they could do. You could have some cones with an activity that they have to do underneath. So maybe they have to all pretend they're doing a selfie pose before they can start again. Just daft stuff like that just brings them in terms of those cognitive skills, those team building skills again. So think about things like finders, keepers, losers, weepers. It's called that because if you get the cone before somebody else, that's yours. It's your cone. You could get the situation where they're going out at the same time. I tend to look at it and go, okay, which is the bigger child, which is the smaller child, or which is the male and female, which may be a bit old fashioned, but if it's a lady and it's a chap, I'd say ladies first, they can have the cone, off you go. And if say, actually, you got it at the same time, here's another one, you have that cone, boom, you can go. So you dissipate any sort of disagreements because obviously you're trying to make sure they have a happy time at your happy camp. Sorry, that was a really bad pun, but I just thought I'd thrown it in there. Conscious, I've talked about equipment where we haven't had games where we haven't got a lot of equipment, and I think that's fine. Hopefully I've given you some ideas there. I can send some further ideas to this particular Zoom call where they've got some ideas and break that down for you where there's maybe less equipment. We talked about bad weather. Obviously, you've got to be careful about the surface. Make sure that they're safe. Make sure they're not freezing cold outside. It's coming back to that child protection kind of rules. Get them inside if you can do, but obviously you need to adapt your activities to be inside. You don't have as big a space. Smaller indoor spaces are great. Just think about how you use them. The volume in the room always gets me, actually. By the time I've done about 20 minutes, half an hour of delivery, I've got a splitting headache because the kids are so up for it and excited, and that's great. So think of ways of how you can bring that sound down a little bit. I tend to talk about the volume on the radio, turning the volume down a little bit. Maybe they're allowed to celebrate, but they can only cheer silently. So they're all doing this, which changes dynamics a little bit. Doesn't work all the time, but just gives you a 2-minute respite of, oh my God, there's a lot of noise in here. Engagement in terms of various ages. Hopefully I've done that, talking about the step principles, fun games and activities. I would try and make sure that you're not playing invasion games where a child who's really tall, maybe 11, 12 years of age, has a massive advantage over maybe a 5-year-old that can't reach up that high. Think about activities like the relay races game. It's why they're so good, is that there's no sort of competitive contact involved. It's competitive because you're running against each other, but there's no physical contact, would be my advice. We talked about step principles, space, task or time, equipment, people, layout of the rooms. I would definitely use a resource to stop them just helping themselves to kit. Would be one thing, and think about trying obviously to make sure things are safe, have that risk assessment done, and make sure that ultimately it's fun and that they're enjoying it. I'd keep it fast paced. Don't play something for ages. Do 2 or 3 minutes, then develop it. 2 or 3 minutes, develop it. So they think they're playing a new activity, but actually you're just tweaking it through those step principles to keep it fun and keep it fresh and keep it moving. Otherwise, if you keep playing the same sort of stuff all the time and not changing it and adapting it and getting their advice about how to change it, it gets a bit stale and gets a bit boring. That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Shelley, Orla, is there anything else you wanted me to add for the guys? That Matt and Ali and Neil have been brilliant in terms of sitting there very calmly and hopefully listening to stuff that's hopefully useful. Are there any questions or anything like that I can help with?
For us, no, but for you guys especially. Sorry, Matt, go on.
So yeah, we've been providing the sort of half funding for loads of years now, and our organisation is really focused on engaging kids that are kind of unengageable. So just a few things I would add to that is, well, first of all, our welcoming activity would generally be a welcoming activity, so that we've already understood that kids are turning up at separate times. So things that we would be playing are lots of chase games, things that kids could join in really easily and quickly to as we sign them in. I love most of the games that are sort of have been said. We would absolutely agree, and I love the way it's about we're getting the kids to come up with the rules, getting them to really take ownership of their delivery. What we've found has worked really well. So I'm from a very traditional sports coaching background, so actually putting my play hat on, which so one of our most our best products is our free play product, which kind of contradicts some of the things we've been talking about. So we actually do have kids from 6-year-olds all the way through to 14-year-olds all playing together, but because the environment isn't a competitive environment, they will play together. So it looks unbelievably chaotic, and anyone with a traditional hat on looking in would think, what the hell is going on there? Because there might be a game of football going on at the same time, a game of netball at the same time, a game of bulldog, and all these things are going on together. So having that there, then what we find is that those older children take a much more pastoral role with the younger ones, so that they kind of protect them and make sure they get involved. And because it's not competitive, you don't have the 12, 13-year-old thinking he's Rambo or she's Rambo going through and dominate. They do involve those other children. Another thing we found works really, really well, especially in sort of the HAF projects, because we've got everything there. We've got children who ascend. We've got kids that are really quite athletic. We've got kids that will probably have this notion that sports is horrible thing. Is we have like either a chill out area or a drop out area. Whereas if they're doing something or an activity that they perhaps don't want to particularly take part in, we don't want to be saying to them, yes, you have to, you know, you're part of the team. Like, they could just sit out, and if they want to sit out for 5 minutes, that's kind of all right. And if they want to sit with their friends and have 2 or 3 minutes, that's kind of all right. So what we find is, if as long as the activity that we're providing is engaging, they'll come back in when it kind of suits them. And there was a really interesting point about that difference between coaching and facilitating. So going back to my background, it's quite difficult for me to take my coaching hat off and actually just let it run and see where it goes. And some of those points around, like, letting the kids decide what those rules are can be quite difficult for just a traditional coach, but you've got to just kind of let it run. But the biggest thing, I think, in all of these programs, it's all about relationship building. So for me, my role my coach's role when we're delivering, excuse me, my dog's in here today, so if you're hearing, it's just about getting out there and getting them talking to the kids and just talking to them about non-sporty things. How's their day? You know, just getting to know them and making them feel really, really important, and that they're the most important thing, not the activity that's going on. That's kind of the only things that I really add. But yeah, look, in terms of reinforcement of the games, yeah, love them all. Some of the pirate stuff, I'm going to pinch that on Friday.
I did it, so I pinched it off somebody else. Said, yeah, definitely copy and steal away, Matt. Please do.
That'd be interesting, because I've got a load of, like, some of these kids that are too cool for school type thing, but you can guarantee that as soon as you get something, the key as well is the coach has to get into it as much as the kids. So it's no good just going to salute the player. Everyone, you know, you've got to be role playing, and you bring everyone along with you.
Yeah, great advice. I think that's a great shout. Thank you, Matt.
Sorry, I've got on mute myself.
Ali or Neil, is there anything else you want to drop in before we wrap up?
No, that was all pretty informative. Written down quite a few notes. I think the themes thing we can definitely take on board. Sorry. God, don't know what happened there. Yeah, so our theme was very much science and sort of space themed as next thing education. So we can definitely take that on board, sort of mix the two sides of it together and introduce sport as like more of a conjoining it with the space theme. So one of our activities is laser tag. We can then sort of join that in with sports and science together and sort of teach them at the same time about the healthy lifestyle and the benefits of doing that. So no, that was really, really helpful.
Fantastic. Sorry, Ali, did you say next thing education?
Yeah, that's right.
You're a new provider for us for Christmas, aren't you? I don't think you were with us in the summer.
No, we're new, yeah.
Oh, okay, so tell us a little bit about what's the kind of ethos, what's the focus of your camps generally?
So we started off doing sort of tech camps initially, so it's all iPad based and laptops and sort of teaching coding and that sort of thing. And then we've recently launched our sort of sister company, Epic Camps. So with Epic Camps, that's where we have the sports, and we also have art. So the kids, when they come to the camp, they get to choose between art, sports, or tech, and sort of they're all going on simultaneously. So the sports sort of new to us, what we're still trying to sort of, rather than have a traditional sort of football and rugby, we've introduced like street dance and archery and bubble football and that sort of thing. So yeah, so it's all sort of new but very exciting at the moment. But yeah, sort of
fabulous,
learning as we go.
Fantastic, good stuff. Well, if that's everything, well, I'll stop the recording now. And this is